Hypnagogic Archive is an internet archive of weird stories and videos from the times of Web 1.0. If you find those topic interesting, please visit the link to the site in the description. The following video consists of stories from the text page of the archive. There is much more. But for now, please enjoy. Alien Chain Email. The following is a classic chain email sent to numerous college campuses in 2005. Attention to recipient. My name is Gordon Wimbledon and I work for a prestigious government space agency. 5 days ago we caught sight of a mysterious illuminated object lowering itself over a field near Taos, New Mexico. Me and several of my colleagues were in the area to observe the event. In all my years of professional work I have never seen anything even remotely similar. The craft was roughly 100 meters in width and constructed from a light yet durable metal. When we approached the craft, we were shocked to discover that it emitted a strange repellent field. Several of my colleagues died days later of radiation poisoning. The beings inside did not make their presence known. For 5 long days we set up camp and waited. We did not alert our agency for fear of creating widespread panic, and agreed that if nothing came of the event we would tell nobody and go to the grave with our secret. 5 days later, however, the unspeakable happened. The leader of these beings, a 7-foot humanoid with an upper exoskeleton, exited the craft on a long strip of the same metallic substance and approached me. I was helpless as it held me spellbound and put its extremities to my head, after which time it initiated a prolonged and painful session of what I can only term as ruthless mind probing. My colleagues tried separating me from the creature but to no avail. During this time I believe the creature obtained most human knowledge, in particular vital space research, leaving us helpless. Upon the conclusion of the link, the leader ran back to its craft and departed. It is my firm belief, and the belief of my peers, that the worst is yet to come, so if you value your safety please alert as many people as possible. Unless the public is made aware of this crisis we may have no recourse should the beings return. Sincerely yours, Gordon Wimbledon.
Call and response, trial and error. Originally posted to the Talk Experience Group November 7, 1992. Hi. Don't know if this really counts as something worth discussing on here, but I've had some jolts so I can stay up and recount it as best as I know how. I've been combing through the group and I find it amazing how many people have come on here to talk about things with complete strangers. My parents got me a personal computer for my birthday which was in August. Since then I've been trying to figure it out. Has a lot of functions and I can also play some games on here. This is my first time posting on a public board, so please excuse me if my grammar is a little off. I've been looking through this directory for a week maybe, and I like lots of the stories. Especially the one about the shark attack. I hear sharks won't actually attack you unless you're bleeding, but it was pretty scary anyway. My story isn't as scary but it is interesting. It's one of those things that happens once in your life, then you forget it or remember it one day and sit up straight, like oh my god, I forgot all about that. I'm writing it here because I want to remember it someday. I don't think it would be healthy to forget about it. My parents take me to my psychiatrist regularly. He's telling me that if I feel emotional I should try channeling my frustration into something. So I'm putting it here for you guys to check out. I found out about this thanks to my friend from school, you know him as Yashar. So thank you for that. Anyway, this is the story. It was around June this year and I was at soccer practice. My parents had dropped me off and they said that they wouldn't be coming back because they had to pick my little brother Kevin up, so I would be walking home. This was fine, it was nice out and I live in a pretty nice neighborhood. Not a gated community or anything, but I've read the local magazines and our crime rates are low. So I planned on playing for about 2 hours and then leaving. About an hour in, though, it started to rain so we were called off the field and went under the bleachers to wait it out. Coach told us that if it didn't stop in 10 minutes practice would be over, and most of us were tired enough that we wanted it to be over, so it wasn't that upsetting all things considered. The rain didn't let up and we all went to the locker rooms to change, and someone loaned me their umbrella. I don't remember who. It was jet black, the kind you bring to funerals. I carried it out and started walking home. It was hard to see because the air was filled with mist, but I was able to make out the street signs if I squinted. Everything was a blur, and the streets were mostly empty. It was only late afternoon, but it was so dark it looked like night. I kept going and I zipped up my jacket. Felt kind of like I was drowning and my umbrella was a diving bell. You see them in old books, sailors used them before submarines. Just a little bit of air in there for the passenger to breathe, but what they didn't know back then is that you can't breathe your own breath forever because with each cycle of your lungs it becomes less oxygen and more carbon dioxide. It was like that, even though I had the umbrella I was still soaked. There were puddles on every corner because there wasn't very good drainage. I kept walking in the direction I thought home was, but it was hard to tell. At this point all the houses and streets looked the same, and I was lost. I sat down under an awning and took a candy bar out of my backpack. I decided that it would be smart to wait until the rain stopped. I was sure that if I could see better I would be able to tell which way home was. I don't get lost easily, I have a good sense of direction and I know my neighborhood. It's not even that big a neighborhood, definitely not the biggest one in our city. I sat for a while, thought about passing the time with my Game Boy but decided it could get ruined in this weather so I didn't. It seemed like I waited forever there, watching the rain go on and on. The drops were big and fat and the clouds were full of them. All I could see from where I was the sidewalk and the curb. Everything past that was a gray mess, and the rain went down the gutter in a little river. Finally the rain gave out. By this point it was late at night and the streets were dark. At least I could see the houses now. The clouds rumbled a little more but soon they evaporated and the moon came out. I still didn't recognize any of the streets. They had names I wish I could remember. I had never walked in the city very much, so I knew I had turned around somewhere, or maybe I had walked past my house. I wasn't tired, though, so the night was young. If I hurried, I thought, I could make it back in time for dinner, and my folks wouldn't know anything was up. These houses weren't any I recognized. The porch lights were on with about half of them, a lot of them were completely dark. Some of them were on hills, located up flights of stairs. This wasn't my neighborhood. In my neighborhood the houses are all located on the ground, the elevation is pretty flat. To add to this confusion, the sidewalk was still very wet and it was reflective, meaning my eyes were bombarded by a light show. Something didn't feel right. The streets kept repeating, so did the houses. Eventually I knew if I walked far enough I would reach a main street or a landmark or something. So I just kept going. I knew about suburban sprawl or how in lots of suburbs all the houses looked the same. About a year ago I visited my grandparents who live across the state. They live in one of those suburbs where every house is identical and you can only tell them apart by their addresses. This was different, though. Like in my neighborhood, all the houses looked different, they all had different attributes and features. Some were bigger than others, they all looked fancy, but some had patios and some didn't, some had garages and some didn't. One had lawn sculptures, one had a fountain in the yard. It was bubbling but I didn't see anybody around. It was like the street was being generated randomly by a computer algorithm at the horizon, and that these houses were randomized while I walked past them. Some of them didn't make any sense. They were just possibilities stuffed together, like 3 stories mashed together in an ugly way that nobody would buy. The moon didn't move, either, or if it did I didn't notice. I was getting tired so I looked around in my backpack for something to eat. I had some corn nuts and half a sandwich. I ate both of those. I had a lot of homework to catch up on, but tonight I wouldn't be able to finish it. I'd have to put it off and go right to sleep with how tired I was. I figured that if nothing was wrong then I should be on the outskirts of civilization by now, but the houses kept going and the streets kept going. I made a few turns right and left now and again to see if I could find a restaurant or something, but nothing changed. The only cars out were parked and there was nobody in them. I thought about going up to one of the houses and asking if I could use the phone, but when I tried, nobody answered the door. I realized maybe these houses were empty. Maybe the whole world was empty, maybe I was losing it. I sat for a while on the sidewalk to collect myself. Whatever time it was late and I felt fatigued. After walking some more, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that somebody was following me. I could hear their steps on the concrete. I thought I heard breathing, but I wasn't sure. I could have asked them where I was, but I knew somehow that they were a threat and that they weren't here to help me. They got closer. I turned around, saw who it was, and then I started running away as fast as I could until my heart caught in my throat and my lungs were going to explode. They were dressed in a dark trench coat and had a hat on, a dark hat. They looked kind of like the man on the neighborhood watch signs. That's always freaked me out from a young age. I couldn't see who it was. It was probably a guy. They were moving slowly but walking toward me all the same, and I couldn't see their face. Then I remembered something my friend Kate had told me about a while ago, that when she slept, a man with a hat would stand in her room and watch her not do anything, or even move really, just stand and watch her aggressively. Sometimes he was accompanied by other characters. I think she meant she was dreaming all this stuff but can't be sure. It reminded me of that, and I wondered if I was dreaming this person up. There were no alleys on these blocks, so there wasn't anywhere for me to hide. I turned right and left and right again, hoping I would throw this hat man off my trail, but I looked over my shoulder and he came walking out from the side. He was distant but he was real, and I didn't want to get closer to find out more. It seemed as if he was playing with me, that he knew he would catch up to me eventually because I was walking quick and using all my energy up while he walked slow and leisurely. He knew there was nowhere I could go because I wasn't close to anywhere. Maybe he was behind this illusion or whatever it was. The hat man, I'm almost sure it wasn't a woman, was around 6 feet tall and his movements were smooth. He glided down the sidewalk without revealing what he was hiding under his coat, which was buttoned from his neck to his waist. Around his waist he had on a belt. I didn't see anything else from where I was standing. He was always about half a block behind me. My throat was dry and irritated, my feet were going as fast as they could, but somehow he always caught up. I decided that since there weren't any alleys or ravines I could hide in, my best course of action would probably be to go up to one of the houses and beg to be let in, and if they wouldn't let me in, then I would break in and find somewhere to hide. I was sure that if the hat man caught up to me he would kill me. So I scrambled up the steep hill in front of one of the houses. It was set back from the street. I knocked over a lawn flamingo on the way to the porch, and when I got there I knocked and yelled. I could hear music playing from inside, so I thought somebody might be inside, and my spirits were lifted a little. The lights were on inside, all I could see was through the shutter, but I thought that if the lights were on, somebody must have turned them on. The hat man was almost on me by now. He was climbing up the stairs out front, so I decided to make my move and break the window. I picked up a chair that was on the porch and I slammed it into the window, breaking glass everywhere. I climbed in. I realized that the window was open so the hat man could get in, so I looked around for a room with a lock on it. I saw what had been making the music, a CD player in the corner. Nobody was using it. Something wasn't right about the house. It didn't feel like anybody lived here. Sure, there was furniture and a carpet and lights, but it really didn't have anything human about it. It was as though these items had been set here by something cold and emotionless. I ran upstairs and looked around. Again, something about the house was wrong. The rooms were just slightly wrong. You got the feeling in this house that it had been artificially created. I went back downstairs and slid the couch around until it covered the window. The hat man still hadn't come in. Maybe he had given up. I locked the front door and looked for a phone. There was one on the table. I dialed it, but all I heard was a busy signal, and I pressed the buttons but they did nothing. This phone wasn't connected. I decided my best bet would probably be to barricade myself in the bathroom until help arrived or the people who owned the house, if there were any, got back and noticed their window was broken. I stopped by the kitchen to look for food, but the shelves and cabinets were empty, and the fridge had nothing. When I turned the taps, no water came out. At this point I heard someone coming into the front room, so I locked the door to the bathroom and hid behind the curtain. Everything was quiet, but I knew the Hat Man was out there, and he was looking. I sat there for a long time, just breathing and waiting. I kind of zoned out eventually. The walls faded out and the footsteps faded away and the light went down. I guess the Hat Man had given up. He wasn't going to bother with me anymore. Maybe this world wasn't his construction. I got sick of sitting there, but I didn't want it to go out the door. It was a gradual process. I dissociated from reality and my head hit the edge of the tub, and I stared at the door and hoped I would get out soon. In an hour I slept. I woke up the next day on the side of the road. Nobody had noticed me there, but there were people around and the street looked normal enough. It was bright and I was sure I was late for school, but at this point I didn't care. I was dirty and exhausted and I wanted to go home and sleep some more. I knew my parents would yell at me. I checked the signs and I knew where I was. I ran home as fast as I could and I was incredibly happy when I saw my house. It looked the same as it had when I left it, although by now it felt like an eternity. It was also distant in some way. I ran up the walk and stopped when I noticed my parents were sitting on the porch. My dad was holding a beer in one hand and looking out into the distance. My mother was sitting next to him on the wicker chair, similarly expressionless. I went up to talk to them. I waved my hand in front of my father's face, but he didn't say anything. My mom asked to go inside and he said she could. I went inside with her and saw my little brother Kevin crying in front of the TV. He was watching some kind of puppet show. Mom put an arm around him and told him that everything would be okay. She told him that they would do anything for him. He kept crying. He was going like a faucet. My dad came inside and put an arm around both of them, and that was when I realized that something was off. I put my hand through the furniture. I was dead. I was a ghost in my own house. I couldn't walk up to the second floor, my legs passed right through the stairs. If our house had a basement, I probably would have fallen into it. I shouted at them, tried consoling them, but they were distraught and crying, and I sat there and watched. I wasn't safe, it hadn't ended, my family was going through trauma and grief, and all I could do was stand by and watch. It was a terrifying moment that still keeps me up at night. No angel came for me, but the Hat Man did. He saw this grief and came toward the house, hiding his face all the while. I tried shutting the door, but that didn't work. My hand went through it. My parents didn't see him, but he saw me and I saw him. We existed in the same plane. My parents and my house weren't safe. Step by step he came along, and then from under the brim of his headpiece I saw his eyes, shimmering, flickering things that glinted in the midday light like a hungry cat's eyes. Then the world snapped back and I was playing soccer again. No Hat Man, people could see me. I was fine. I wasn't dead, I was alive, and it was the same day, and there was no rain. After the game I walked home and thought about what I had been through. I think this is what drug trips are like. Out-of-body experiences must be like this. I got home and I wasn't late, my parents weren't grieving, and my brother Kevin is as annoying as ever. I feel like this story isn't worth anything because ultimately I never learned anything. Nothing in my life has changed. I feel like an experience as bad as this should make me feel something, make me think my decision's over. Maybe I'm a sociopath. Maybe I'll be the Hat Man when I grow up. Maybe I'll become the master of space and time, and I'll create realities where I can chase my past self through streets I dreamed up. Maybe I'll torture my prey. Or maybe not. Maybe that's all there is to it. I hope you liked this story. I probably won't post any more stories because, to be honest, my life really isn't that interesting and I don't have any other stories to tell.
Chloe, final thoughts. I learned, a long time ago, that life doesn't always work out the way you want it to. Since I learned that, I've lived my life according to that principle that the world is a cold and remorseless place, and sometimes when things don't work how you want them to, you have to go in there and smooth out the edges, and bend reality to your liking. I guess the first time I learned that was when I was 22 and living out in the middle of Idaho, and I wanted to be seen by people for something. Wanted to be seen as kind of an expert on things. There wasn't a lot to do in Boise. So I went to all the local bars, restaurants, stage productions, tried gathering information on anything I could, to fill my brain with the knowledge it craved. I read dozens of books on how to meet people, self-help guides from some of the leading experts in the field. But no matter how I tried to change who I was, whenever I approached some guy at happy hour, he would always get this weird look on his face and go talk to some other girl. It got so repetitive I almost grew accustomed to it. When I saw Steve at the AST conference in 1998, everything changed. I could divide my life according to that one event the moment I caught a glimpse of him behind a row of sparkling new AST monitors. He was a dream, a strong jawline, impeccably dressed. You could tell he had his mind set on a goal. He was going places. Up in the world. The kind of man I had been raised believing I was entitled to. I lived with my aunt. She was a bitter old thing, and most days I tried avoiding her presence, which permeated the lower level of our house. I wanted Steve to understand, if he agreed to date me, that I was my own person, with goals and ambitions as lofty as his. That if we were to become a pair, we would be the talk of Boise, innovators in the field. I checked out several books from the library on programming, just so that if the subject ever arose during one of our conversations, I would feel relatively confident on the terminology and lingo. For several days straight I wondered why Steve wouldn't answer me, why he wouldn't bend to my will, why my efforts bore no fruit. My mind was as compressed as a ball of aluminum foil, and the logic of the game Steve appeared to be playing eluded me. They say everything in life, even the blatantly negative, is a learning experience, an opportunity to rectify one's mistakes. Steve's death was certainly one of those negative events. If I had been there, I told myself, to console him in his darkest hour, sitting before the AST monitor, viewing my romantic pleas up close, he probably would have understood what he had been missing. But he was selfish, and put his own life over my happiness, and in doing so he taught me a valuable lesson that nothing in life is easy. If you want something, it'll be an uphill battle of persistence and confidence. I quickly put Steve out of my head, became more resolute and iron-willed, and I no longer worried about whether men found me attractive. What they thought or said about me behind my back was without form and void. I lived a secretive and furtive life here on the internet, investing in speculative bubbles before they burst, posting on forums under various pseudonyms, always with an inquisitive tone. I wanted something more in life, something beyond the confines of Boise, and my mind was like an absorbent rag. It continued soaking up the knowledge. Sometimes I feared my brain would spill open, it was carrying so many fields of study. I got migraines often, went to sleep at 9 p.m. My aunt told me, "Chloe, one of these days I'm going to have a stroke. And I won't be here to take care of you anymore." We had tea in the evenings, which was usually our only real time of reconciliation, and I cared little whether or not she had a stroke. She had a circulatory condition which made her veins unusually pronounced, and she sat like a vulture over her food, a stringent buzzer to the carrion. She died in 2000, 2 days after the new millennium rang in. I remember it because I had woken up and looked out the window and felt the rays of the dawn on the shag carpet, and when I opened the door there was a permeating sense of death about the house, and I knew even before I entered the room and gazed at her disheveled corpse on the sheets that the inevitable had come to pass. Time marches on, and none of us are privileged enough to escape death. That was what I thought. I had been told that around Boise from a very young age, and I had never stopped to question whether it was really true, whether or not you could cheat death. I mulled this over as her cold, dead buzzard pupils pierced past mine. Clearly, she hadn't been as crafty as I. I pulled the covers over her and called the police, and I filled out the funerary paperwork and attended her funeral a month later, and as the Reverend read from his pocket-sized scripture I made plans for the future, and made sure that if I were to go out, it would not be with a whimper. Finally, scanning pages and pages of local events, desperate to escape the now empty property, looking for anything to do besides sulk around the lifeless hallways and staircases, I happened upon an advertisement for a speech which was to be given by a member of a secretive mystic group known as the Clade at the very same conference hall where I had seen Steve for the first and only time 2 years prior. The speaker, Bayard Macy, was convinced that he had lived from the inception of the universe to its death, in various forms as various things, and furthermore that he had achieved this process multiple times over, and had essentially cracked the code to immortality. And anyone could do as much, he said, if they only heeded his call. I took one glance at his picture and decided that if anyone had the capacity to live forever, it was him. I immediately rang the conference hall up and purchased a ticket to the event. It was surreal, I will admit, to walk into the same room where the love of my life had been standing, and not be greeted by a row of those familiar AST design processors. The room looked very different with rows and columns of folding chairs set up in formation, all towards the stage. The ceiling was low and the lights were dim, and I grabbed a seat near the front, in the second or third row, to see this master conjurer, this immortal being. The room went dark and he stepped onto the platform in an unassuming suit, and a fog machine backstage billowed cloud upon cloud onto his cheap business shoes, and then from behind the curtain came a device, a spherical glass-looking thing, with wires and buttons attached to it. This was the time sphere, a device which functioned much as other time machines did, with one crucial difference: the time sphere had been through so many paradoxes, according to the brochure we had been given at the door, and so many logic-defying self-fulfilling prophecies, that it was on the verge of complete failure. It certainly looked that way. One side was badly scarred, microscopic cracks were beginning to form in the exterior, and Mr. Macy lifted the hatch and sat inside and rubbed his hands over the leather seat, which was similar to the cockpit of a fighter jet. I know because my aunt had taken me to an air show when I was 8 and I had been able to sit in an authentic B-52, and I came to realize just how comfortable it was, how that comfort was necessary when your vehicle was careening around the sky at breakneck speeds, speeds that could bend the laws of sound and sight. Macy pulled a small microphone from his vest, looked at it, and then, with a dry wheeze, from within the time sphere, he said, in that ancient voice, "Wow. You all showed up." Polite laughter, some clapping, all people with dead stares and very little movement. It was like sitting in the middle of a wax museum. I was out of my element, though there was something about Macy's disposition that kept me spellbound, held me to the cheap folding plastic seat and the artificial nylon rug. "I'm on my way back to home base," he said, grinning ear to ear with a kind of timeless bliss. "Karen. I make a lot of runs between Seattle and Karen, you know. Spread the word. Got to spread the word. My work is never done. I always run into some people who tell me I'm crazy. If I were crazy, I would have given up long ago. But I keep on. And I've learned a lot of things, through many lifetimes. One is that if people don't want to believe something, you can't convince them. How many of you have told your family, co-workers about this, and they wouldn't believe you?" A few hands shot up, mostly in the back, and he pointed at them, still concealed by the confines of that eternal device, and then something unexpected happened. His eyes glowed red and he looked positively evil. The hands shot back down, silence fell over the crowd, and he calmed down and folded his wrinkled talons over each other as if he was a perfectly normal man and these were ordinary circumstances. "I need a volunteer for this next part," he said. "This will convince any of you who have doubts. Anyone at all." Without really thinking, I shot up out of my seat and spread my arms wide, feeling the energy of the moment take me into rapture. He lifted the hatch, scanned the rows and columns of seated individuals, and something inside his all-knowing mind clicked, and with his outstretched claw, he pointed at me. "You. Yes, girl, you. Come on up." I rose, rather levitated, onto the shiny wooden stage, and he held my hand up and I smiled. "She's going to demonstrate this for us. Now you can take pictures of this, if you thought to bring cameras. I guarantee, after you all see this you can go home and tell your family off. Because this is going to make you believe." He sat me down in the device and closed the hull, and I felt as if I were held in the womb of the universe, the break in the oven of creation. From outside came a few flashes and clicks as the observers shouted, and Macy tapped on the glass and asked if I were all right. I remembered how terrifying it had felt to sit in the cockpit of a jet, even if that jet weren't going to take off with me inside it. I was about to journey into the cosmos. He faced the crowd and lifted his arms, this mad sermon alight with life, and then he whirled around with more energy than a man of his physique should have been able to muster. "Where would you like to go?" he asked, politely. I had infinite possibilities before me. My brain began to ache as I considered them. He may have been of infinite age, however he was not of infinite patience. He tapped his foot and impulsively, I answered. 1992, I said from behind that protective barrier. Boise, right here. 1992. He appeared confused as I was when I said that, but I had said it, and when you make decisions, you can't always go back on your word. Certainly not in this case. So I stared straight ahead, hands gripping the rails on either side of the set, and before me the screen of the apparatus lit up with green computerized text, and Macy pulled a small device from his jacket, and the crowd sat in petrified wonder as he raised it, and set his bone-dry index finger on a button on the oblong device, and in the blink of an eye he lowered it, and I could faintly make out the noise it made, the final noise I would hear in that iteration of the year 2000. It is difficult to describe the process of being displaced in the causal ribbon. Suffice it to say that Macy's voice echoed throughout the process, and when I arose from that technicolor soup of noise and pastel, it was 1992, and I was standing in the middle of Boise as it had been a few years prior before I had met Steve. Before my aunt had died. I felt rejuvenated, resurrected, and I believed then that with the aid of the time sphere, with the addition of hindsight, that I could live my life over again and avoid the mistakes that had led me to such a melancholic state of being. I ran down the streets and observed just how much can change in 8 years. It's a very gradual and nondescript ordeal, the transformation of one's environment. However, the Boise I had left no longer existed. Here I was, here and now, to create a brighter future for myself. My mood was ruined when I saw my 16-year-old counterpart standing on the porch, in that terrible fashion I once wore. It hadn't occurred to me, until then, that her presence here was inescapable. Her clothes were gauche and without substance, her eyes were bitter as she beheld what she would eventually become, and I returned her gaze in equivalent contempt. We stood on either side of the fence for some time. I observed her like a snarling beast in a cage, and she observed me like some callous zoo-goer. The experience must have been eerie and jarring for us both, though more so for her. "Who are you?" The question rolled off her tongue like citric acid, echoed over the reflective buildings and facades of Boise, which were now a deep amber from the setting sun. I wanted to snap her neck there and then. I hated the little thing so much. But I displayed tact and reservation. Without saying a word, I darted off in the direction I had arrived from and spent hours walking alone, downtown, with no means of returning to my own time and place. I was a castaway on the ocean of time. Little by little, in that nocturnal summer ambience, as the shops turned their lights off one by one and the trees by the edge of the sidewalk swayed gently back and forth, Macy's voice found its way through the ether of years to me, filled my head until I could no longer ignore it or dismiss it as a figment of my overwrought imagination. I sat on a small green bench and Macy asked, "Are you happy? Is this what you wanted?" Yes, it was. Well, it still is. I can't say I hate it. I hate her, though. I hate them all. "Why don't you do something about it, Chloe?" came his rustic drawl. I could picture him, even now, in the Karen Lodge, pressing his fingers to his temples in that overstated business suit, taking the time out of his day to help me with my problems. He was a wise and venerable man, even now, all these years later, that cannot be denied or ignored. "What can I do?" I responded, quietly, muttering vague platitudes under my breath. "I'm alone here. Nobody to talk to. Not her. Not either of them." "You could kill them," Macy said, reverberating throughout my skull. "That's what I always do, when things don't go my way. I erase people. In the name of my own interests. Time is like any other resource, Chloe, when you get right down to it. Exploitable, profitable, to be utilized for one's own personal gain. If I can do it, surely you can." And as this last statement reverberated into the darkness, my sights caught the corner drugstore, the drugstore which had gone bankrupt in 1995 but was here in 1992, still operating as always, trusty and reliable. Still open with lit windows and that chalk-white interior, for 5 more minutes. 5 minutes during which I could purchase certain drugs. Certain prescription drugs, for my aunt. She was found the next morning, having suffered a quiet and painless death which was ruled by the police to be from natural causes. They never even looked for traces of the small white capsules I had dropped into her glass of bedside water the previous night when she and my former self had been fast asleep. And if I looked 8 years older, mysteriously, to them, they didn't show it. Surely they wouldn't accuse me of being some sort of imposter, not after the trauma I had endured following the death of my loved one. My past self I had to use slightly different methods on. She was feisty, put up a fight beneath my hand. I worried that if she were to die, I would be erased. Yet Macy had said that such issues did not matter, that time could be exploited at will with no consequence. She squirmed and writhed as I held her lips shut to ensure that no screaming came from her lips. She barely objected. In fact, while I tied her, dragged her screaming and kicking into the basement, her eyes swollen and filling with tears. I looked into them and saw a bit of myself in them. That bit would need to go, I reasoned. Forever. She said nothing as I plugged in the screwdriver and began spinning. I would expect her to say something. I hadn't taped her mouth. But she only stared across at me, in dead silence, as we sat like some kind of mirror image on chairs opposite each other, framed only by a single light bulb. She without free agency and I with. I felt catharsis as the driver bore into her skull, an easy way to go. Lights out. One puncture wound to the brain. I treated it with epoxy from the carpentry table to ensure that no blood spilled out. Then, in a long and giddy process that occupied most of the night, I took the shovel in the corner and used it to pry up the floorboards, placed my counterpart gingerly into an airtight plastic bag to prevent odors from wafting up, and then set the floorboards down again. Hammered extra nails into them, then covered the spot with a large crate. Truth be told, I was exhausted and sleep-deprived when the police showed up, and I told them about how I had found my lifeless aunt. Probably helped my performance, strengthened my feigned grief. As Macy had assured me, no consequences came. I didn't vanish from existence. The fabric of reality didn't dissolve. I sat on the front porch sipping an ice-cold dollar tea from the gas station down the street, eating my favorite flavor of Pringles, which have now, for whatever reason, been taken off the shelves. I felt akin to a goddess. Macy continued to speak through me, as he told of his adventures from the inception of the universe to its destruction. He told me of his infinite lifespan, his accomplishments in organizing the clade, his many transgressions against preconceived temporal logic. He had been born, he said, in Caron, Kansas, in 1926. It was a different 1926, however, and the one I had known was only the result of his action, his decisiveness, his will. He had grown from the dust bowl to a paratemporal deity. I could become a strange goddess equivalent to him, he told me. If I trusted my decisions, displayed no regard for the welfare of those around me, prioritized my survival above all else, I would survive anything. But I could not display doubt. This, he assured me, was key. Doubt was the termite which gnawed at will, it weakened one's resolve. To doubt one's actions would be to undermine the efficacy of those actions. And so, with the assistance of the voice in my head, I resolved to have Steve. Again. Nothing was going to keep me from him now. March 12, 1998 arrived and I woke up early in the dawn, put on my best clothes to head down to the AST conference. Though I was older now, close to 30 by my estimate, although birthdays were no longer a certainty, I felt as if the brisk walk was a ritual of sorts, an ordeal I had been made to suffer for the last 6 years. This was the payoff, the culmination. My second chance. I even bought a watch for the occasion, timed it such that I would be in the hall 5 minutes earlier. Steve wouldn't be pulled back by his friend, he would come over to say hello and then we would leave the hall. All that blood on my hands would be washed clean, all the pain and effort would be worth it. I would have everything my way, because I knew what was going to happen and could prevent it from happening as it had. I was on my way now. Yes, Chloe, Macy said from the deep recesses. Atta girl. When I saw Steve amid the row of luminescent computer monitors, I felt a wash of euphoria sweep over me. In rapture I approached him, waggling my fingers. He was every bit as approachable as I had envisioned. A wide smile spread across his face. I spotted his friend approaching from across the aisle, so I put my hand around his back and moved him to a display where we would be alone. "Who are you?" he asked. He had a gorgeous build, looked like a football player, with a full mane of hair and a precisely ironed uniform. Of all the conceivable permutations, I had been led here. This was the end of an inevitable process. "Chloe," I responded dreamily. "Chloe Richards. Just a local." He shrugged and pulled away from me. I grabbed him again, by the collar this time, and looked deep into his mind, furtive, scanning, nervous. Had to end the uncertainty, because uncertainty bred doubt. Remember the tenets. "Listen, Steve," I said, and he flinched ever so slightly when he heard his own name. "If you're here, and you want to know some of the best spots to eat or hang out, call me. Just call me. Think about it. And with that, I plucked a ballpoint pen from his shirt pocket and grasped his hand, inscribing my phone number onto his palm. He was mine now. And then I left, without saying anything. Let him decide whether or not to contact this mystery woman. I spent a long while that night reflecting on my method, gazing out the attic window at the nocturnal Idahoan activity. Tapping my fingers, waiting desperately for the phone to ring off the hook. Out on the horizon, cars wound their way up into the hills, toward Dry Creek Valley or Schaefer Butte, and the lights disappeared as they rounded the curves. I imagined the roads were timelines and the cars were people, and that I was witnessing firsthand, from a bird's eye view, the extent of temporal mechanics. The phone rang and I answered it, and I waited with hesitant sighs. If Steve didn't say yes, I decided, in that split second before he spoke, I would kill him. "Hi, Chloe," he said. Warm and friendly. "Just thought I would reach out. Listen, is there some place we could meet up? Tonight?" My mind raced. It was close to 11 p.m. Most places were closed. "There's this bench," I said without so much as a second thought. "I'll swing by your place and pick you up, and we can walk down there together. You're at the Holiday Inn, right?" "Yeah. I'll be standing by the third entrance." And just like that, the line went dead, and my mind raced with the possibilities of the future, the glorious future. The future which wouldn't have been possible without Macy's time sphere, praise the Clade. I put on some shoes and took the last bus to the hotel, skipped my way to the entrance where he was standing, leaning against the lock, hands in his pockets, casual and prepared. I slid my arm around his and we strolled through the parking lot and toward the street. I was in ecstasy. He held my trembling fingers, visibly alarmed by my nervous disposition, the gathering crow's feet, visible blemishes on the skin that in another time and place had been flawless. He had rejected it then, and as his lips began to open, in one terrifying instant I realized what he was about to say, and I froze on that small bench as the wind whistled through the trees in the dead of night. "Chloe, I'm married." "I'm sorry. I know, so far, that I've been descriptive in many of the things I've related, up to and including the murder of my aunt and alternate self. However, I remember very little of what happened then. Something about a rock. Not a very big one, merely one of those you see lining public thoroughfares such as the one we were on. I remember its heft and density as I clutched it with my fingers, icy cold and brittle. I remember something about the noise it made when it grazed his skull. Apart from that, however, I recall little. I don't, for instance, know what I did to clean the blood from the asphalt. I don't know where his body is hidden, whether it's down in the basement with the others or if I tossed it in a river or discarded it carelessly in the trunk of a nearby station wagon. All I can say for sure is that once more, Mr. Macy, my only true friend throughout this perpetual ordeal, kept me safe from the watchful and ever-vigilant eyes of Boise's finest. And for that, despite what came later, I am forever grateful. I knew I had to leave Boise behind. Macy's voice guided me, subtly. "Colorado," it said. "Move to Colorado, start a new life. Blank slate, clean slate. Nothing you've done matters, Chloe, it was all for nothing. So why worry about it?" In a stupor, a kind of subconscious daze, I gathered my things. From outside came the glare of the police siren passing through the neighborhood. Those all too familiar popsicle lights on the walls. Had to run. Had to run farther than I ever had before. It may not have been Macy's voice, but rather a fragmented and internalized piece of my psyche, one with no boundaries or reservations. It sounded like him. Had that comforting musk. The tone of deep velvet armchairs and freshly baked bread. I heard it as I ran, sack in hand, through the hills of Idaho, the grassy knolls and the dimly lit stretches of road. It throbbed to a further extent when I hit Wyoming, made my way on foot beyond the shadowy monoliths of Bridger Teton by night, caught rides with grizzled truckers who would likely have tried something if I didn't appear insane. No. I was insane, I'll admit it. Rarely slept, only 2 outfits, subsided on junk food for 3 months straight as I made my way toward the site of what was to become my life's work. I lay in ditches and listened to the voice in my head as he told me stories of the distant epochs, and all the while Kier burned a fiery and all-consuming life in the heavens above, which rotated like a magnificent mural upon the ever-impenetrable nothing. I knew the site when I saw it. It had been after 10 days of hard trekking down the Poudre Canyon, along the rim of the Front Range, coming upon towns with names which were foreign to me in this frame of mind: Berthoud, Campion. None seemed adequate for the task Mr. Macy had been subtly hinting at, and as I approached the area the idea took form, like a completed jigsaw puzzle. Effortlessly it dawned on me. I have enemies, he said. My line of work, girl, you know. If you've ever had to deal with the IRS, it's a bit like that. But they have a weakness. Surely you've read the stories about the dragons with the tender point at the neck, the giants with the bat foot or whatever. We were sitting alongside Route 36 at around 9 p.m., and my eyes were drawn to the distant, sparkling lights of Longmont, which served as a beacon of civilization past the featureless crags and promontories which yawned up toward the sky. We heard them whenever we write something down, he whispered. Take a picture, write a book. They scream. The little bastards actually scream, like mice. I ever tell you about the time my dad set up a glue trap? It's true. Lots worse than the ordinary mousetraps, they die a quick and painless death with them for the most part. But the glue traps, they're another matter. Dad came up to me with one, said, just watch here, Bayard, and I did. For hours I sat and waited, and eventually this little bastard came in sniffing, smelled his treat. And he lunged at it, and his paws got all sticky and his fur got entwined and he tried pulling out, tried as hard as he could, but the excitement worked him up into a fervor. Organs ruptured, his little heart went spattering all over the place. Kidney followed soon after, and stopped moving. I didn't respond, tried gathering my own thoughts, pressed my index fingers against my temples and rubbed them. The lights on the horizon began to warp and shift into varying hues of purple. That's what these things need, Macy assured me. A slow death, make the bastards scream because they just don't know what's good for them. We're pioneers of time, you and I are. Explorers on the new frontier. And the frontier is ours to desecrate. The next day I looked into the property, spoke to the hygiene property office, picked up cassette tapes and VHS tapes and 8-track tapes and helical scan and high 8 and super 8 from the Longmont thrift store and carried them in a satchel to the building, which had originally been some kind of corn processing plant but now stood vacant and empty, perfect for utilization in this new endeavor. By nightfall, the first shelf was completed. It was soon followed by 3 more. I wondered whether or not the beings Macy had spoken of would approach me, and when. I sat awake at night, sleeping on the floor in the midst of that day's haul. The people at the thrift store gave me strange looks as I made my daily trip to and from hygiene, yet soon enough half of the archival shed was filled. I was overjoyed, and didn't have the faintest idea why. I found a few like-minded individuals in Boulder one night, while strolling along Pearl Street Mall as a diversion. Aspasia and Scott were kind people, sitting aside a fountain which gurgled and sloshed, and I took advantage of their generosity and kindness. It was the first real contact I had made with anyone in over a year, and they were bored and tired of the present, and so I offered them a journey into the past. My eccentricities made a definite impression, and while I didn't think they would volunteer with no pay to spend 3 hours every weekday at the archival building, assembling electrical systems and filling our bureaucratic forms, they were on the front steps the next morning, prepared for anything that lay ahead. I guided them like insects onto their work, and they were eager to oblige. It was almost eerie. They asked, a few times, who the president was, and I told them he was funding this project. I was the president, of course, in theory, though Macy very well could have been. I took orders from him and he became less of a pronounced entity and more so faded into my subconscious, integrated himself into my head. I was second in command to him, and I believe that we remained as long as we did in part due to his vision, his clarity, his accounting for every contingency. The years passed slowly and the new millennium happened once again and I took little notice of it. I spent some of what remained of my money from Boise on state-of-the-art computers, servers, and infrastructure. Not from AST, of course. They had lost my business. Little by little the organization took shape, like a planetoid accruing debris to add to its own mass, and I remained in my office and waited for any problems to arise, and none did for the most part. I wondered who the beings Macy spoke of had been, and devised attack plans in my head, which I doodled onto notebook paper so I wouldn't forget, still attempting to remain in full control of my life, even if my life I envisioned it had long since broken into a million tiny pieces. The climate was different here, I soon realized. For our first winter we put in insulation and high-grade windows, and during many of the blizzards I and Scott and Aspasia sat around and they told me about their courses at CU Boulder, what they were learning, and I listened idly while outside the world became a blank canvas of snow and icicles. Scott's speciality was local history. Aphasia was working her way up to earn a major in theater. She was particularly fond of the Shakespearean adage that all the world was a stage. She even kept a fridge magnet with a quote on her filing cabinet. More volunteers followed. I ensured that their schedules were flexible and that their time was valued. Stringing them along was the key, letting them see just enough of my ends that they'd understand what it was they had to do. The pieces continued to fall into place. Our organization was thriving. I remember the first time I saw one of those things. It's the sort of experience you never really forget. You have this jolt of adrenaline in your chest, starts pumping and palpitating, and you've overcome by a rush of intense guilt and remorse. That's what they do. They inspire pity in you, because they are pathetic when you get right down to it, slovenly and without grace. I had been expecting their arrival for some time, because the days were still and quiet and the noontime haze had gathered over the entire town of Hygiene. Small little wooden shacks built from quaint oak where the locals spoke little and performed even less in the way of action. I remember Aspasia had been standing alongside me at one of the shelves in the middle of the shed, sorting copies of some defunct local magazine into boxes. All of a sudden, she looked at me, and I got a sensation on the back of my neck as if something had passed behind us. She felt it too. "Chloe!" She screamed as the box with the magazines was torn from the shelf and careened onto the floor, whereupon it burst into flame. She ran for the fire extinguisher and I, coughing into my elbow over the smoke and foam, tried consoling her while the tears ran down her face and she aimed at the cinders with a wavering aim. She understood, at least somewhat, that I was privy to the source of the event, and she felt resentment toward me because I would not make the information as clear as she would prefer. "Asp," I said, clutching tightly at her elbow. "It's okay. You just dropped it, that's all." "It's a poltergeist," she said. "Has to be. I saw a TV special about them once. They're manifestations of a disturbed mind, energy manifest." "Oh God, whose mind is it? Mine? Am I doing this?" She was a mess of nerves, so I brewed a cup of chamomile tea for her in my office, where she collapsed onto my futon, exhausted from the effort with the extinguisher. "It's not that," I reassured her. "Not a poltergeist, anyway. I don't know what that was, but it's not you. You're fine. Calm down. Breathe." She took the cup and stormed out without saying another word, and we didn't discuss it after that. She may have seen the other from the corner of her eye, as I had, before it made itself invisible as they're known to do. I can't say for certain how much she was onto. The following years were filled with all manner of events, from the execution of the Melrose Hypnophis to the numerous staff changes we went through, to the construction of the facility's infrastructure. The archive was featured in several press outlets, and I became less aware of who I had been in the previous timeline. It slowly left me and I forgot about the smell of my dead body festering beneath the floorboards. She was still up there, I realized. Even now, while my reputation grew and my domain broadened, the shadow of who I had been lay dormant, known to nobody save myself and Mr. Macy. It would need to stay that way. The next time I encountered an other, I had been at the archive late, shuffling through some tax returns, mindlessly lost in my own reverie, and the thing had manifested itself through the frame of the door to my office. I remained completely still, hoping that it would leave if I remained dormant. No such luck. It was massive, and it looked even worse than how Macy had described it, covered in scales and bursting sores, little gray hairs over its mouth, from which protruded 2 mandibles coated in slime, and then the arms. They made a distinct sound, like the bells attached to a cat's neck, a kind of cracking sound that amounted to irrefutable evidence of their presence. The same noise I heard in cornfields when I was younger. Corn grows at such a fast rate that if you're standing in a large enough group of corn you can hear it grow, little by little, inch by inch. As the thing's arms thrashed and it ran toward me, I ducked under my desk and waited there in complete silence for around 5 minutes until it left. I assume it was probably blind or otherwise deprived of some sense to that effect. It was then, I think, around 2005, that I became fully aware of the danger I had been put in, and wondered what Mr. Macy was thinking when he sent me here. Still, I held out hope that maybe he had some sort of plan for combating the onslaught. The frequency of abnormal events increased by the week. I even kept track of them in a little calendar. We moved on, some of us left. Aphasia in particular became less optimistic about her own future, Her personality was altered significantly by her time here. Her once bubbly optimism was gradually usurped by a sour demeanor and a thankless dedication to my whims. I, too, was transformed in certain ways by the edifice which housed us. I became more conscientious around temporal disturbances, made a greater effort to conceal them, not only from the staff but from my own head in a sense, to deny them, to normalize the rapidity with which they struck. Every shelf cracking open, every box ripped apart by unseen trans-dimensional hands, became an excuse to continue down the path I had chosen. You're probably wondering about the incident at the gas station. Call it luck, but that was the first time I spotted one of the bastards up close. It was staying close to the wall, letting out these pathetic gasps, and I saw her in there, mindlessly indulging in copyright infringement. Could have spotted the citrus emerald from a mile away. I had been using it until about 6 months prior to that night, until my laptop started oozing purple fluid from the monitor. Seeing the application out in the wild made my blood seethe. I was impulsive, you're probably saying to yourself right now. Acted on a whim, on a selfless spur-of-the-moment crusade, and in my line of work that's foolhardy. You're probably right. However, as I hope I've made clear, things don't always go the way you want, and if they don't, there's really no reason in adhering to a plan. I don't know what became of her after I drove out, whether the thing got her. But I did try to distract it. Pulled out an 8-track cartridge I had been concealing under a tarp in the trunk for an occasion such as this. It reared up on its hind legs, arms shaking. I guess I know what they really sound like. Aspen leaves. Golden coins fluttering in a sharp wind. It charged at the car, but I led it around the block some, hoping it'd be distracted enough to get off the scent of the lime wire. I hope my effort worked, because the thing whacked my taillight with one of those malformed appendages, and the next day I had to go in to get it repaired, and the guy at the shop asked me how it happened. I told him it had been a tree branch. I don't think he bought it entirely. C'est la vie. The resentment I held toward the things was partially due to Mr. Macy's conditioning, and partially due to my own standards. The incidents just kept piling up, and with each one came a new challenge, one which I overcame using the resources at my disposal. It was difficult at first, although on my personal computer, behind a password, I created a file with a list of remedies and useful deterrents. They had weaknesses, I was sure of that. Silver bullets and wolfsbane. Above all, I tried to keep the spirits of the staff happy. By 2007, we had grown to around 15 strong, and our server space grew as these volunteers from Denver and Boulder, many of whose names elude me, brought in free equipment and genuinely believed in the cause. Then came the notoriety, what I would refer to as the golden period. We were covered in national magazines, featured as one of the best resources on the internet. I was asked to drive all the way out to some studio in California to get some pictures taken. The pictorial declared us innovators and pioneers, selfless juggernauts who would sacrifice our time and energy into something so banal. It wasn't, really, I told them. It was exciting, an adrenaline rush. Yes, they said in the monochrome soundstage with the pale screen behind me and the click of the Nikon ahead. Yes, it really must be like that. Polite laughter. I feared these confrontations as each one increased the likelihood of our connection with the space being found out in some official capacity. Keeping a secret is difficult, especially when one's business model revolves around complete transparency. A group of tourists came by in 2008. Apparently we had been added to Boulder County's official list of desirable attractions. I politely dismissed them with a swish of my hand and the soft click of the screen door, told them that if they wanted to they could come back some other time, and warned the guide in no uncertain terms that if the archive wasn't removed from the list I'd go down to the county clerk's office myself and have a word with them. The publicity had another angle, too. Amplified the odds of the police discovering those dead bodies. I hadn't changed my name. House had probably been foreclosed, debt collectors and real estate agencies trying to hunt me down. I hadn't made the proper arrangements, had just left it up there on the hill to rot, and the bodies in the basement probably smelled. Nobody could go down there without latching onto the rancid aroma of mildew. My computer's search history was filled with all kinds of research into the decomposition of a body, how long it took for bodies to become skeletons, that kind of thing. If the police found my hard drive, they would be able to bust me for sure. Frantically, late at nights, my mind raced with a million possibilities possibilities wherein I faced the consequences of my actions, which Macy had assured me was in all cases avoidable via flippant defiance of temporal logic. Along the course of my internet sleuthing, I learned of Adipocere. When I retired to my lodging at the Hygiene Motor Lodge every night, which I had been staying at for nearly a decade by then, with few questions asked of me, I fell into a fitful torrent of dreams. During these episodes I ran my hands into vats of Adipocere, felt its creamy slick texture along my flesh, arm deep in the stuff I squeezed it and grabbed it and painted my face with it. Became a real mess. That's what the archive is, it's Adipocere. It's a timeless grave where things go to die. Every file, every list, is engulfed in grave wax. It defies temporal logic, as I had. It can make something 100 years long dead function normally, even if all actual life is drained from it. And while my thoughts became consumed by Adipocere, the archive itself decayed, fell into disrepair, and our staff fell from 15 to around 5, as it had been in the early days, and gradually we slipped back into irrelevancy and obscurity, there on the high moors surrounded by the foothills, an otherworldly landscape by night. Aspasia left in 2013. She didn't say anything when she did, just handed me her resignation early in the morning, which was reasonably well written and concise. She stood by while I skimmed through it. Said something about her mind being occupied with other concerns, a feeling she didn't belong. When I was done, I handed it back to her and she shambled out, all life drained from her, all her energy depleted, tore the floppy disks and the microcassettes which sat untouched in the rows and columns of memory. I had created something, some sort of entity. In my sleep it took the form of a barrel, whose opening was like a mouth with gnashing skeletal teeth. Full of Adipocere, an ocean of the stuff, crumbling and shifting, the wood of the barrel ancient and well built, with metal slats to hold it together. It was a man-built thing, created by perhaps some ancient merchant in a faraway land, or a farmer who used it to water his date crops in the waving billows of the Fertile Crescent, which weren't so different from the lands I found myself in today, environmentally speaking. "Don't hurt them," it said. "They can't hurt you." From its recesses came the soft noise of the substance sloshing back and forth in those dark, hollow corners. It was reassuring, a respite from the brutal stress I faced every day in my office, weighed down by submissions and paperwork. I had very few recourses left at my disposal. "What do you expect me to do?" I asked the barrel. "I'm alone here, alone and afraid of what they'll do to me if they find me. They absolutely can hurt me, I've seen them, they have those claws." "Calm yourself. What I'm about to tell you is vital not only to your survival but mine. Listen carefully." It proceeded to tell me about the nature of the others, that if I had never known about them they would never have been able to find me, that if I ignored them their presence would diminish, and that I could condition my mind so as to diminish the threat they posed, such that they could not injure or harm me. Mind over matter, raw human will over tangible opposition. The more I gazed at those deep folds of corpse fat, the more sense it made. I bought books, incense, rituals and incantations on meditation and how to clear the mind. How to induce a trance state of near catatonia, slow my breathing and heart rate down to 5 per minute, to change the sorts of brain waves I had completely of my own accord, switch from theta to gamma and back again. I learned how to distinguish between NREM and REM sleep, stuffed an entire corner of my office with neurological papers and spent hundreds of nights recording myself sleeping. These sleep recordings were critical. Every day, upon my arrival at the grounds, I would play one tape of myself, recorded over the roughly 8 hours I slept each night. I spent 8 hours glued to the TV, watching in real time as my brain entered those subconscious realms, with the Adipocere barrel and the hidden danger, trying desperately to spot any aberrations. There were none. My eyes flickered, at certain points they opened and my pupils dilated, however it was hard to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this was anything out of the ordinary. I told myself that the others were not real, that they were only a byproduct of my fevered imagination and that I was slowly losing my mind, and I had probably imagined Mr. Macy and the time sphere and all of it. I didn't know how old I was, whether the time skip had elongated or shortened my life, and every time I tried brainwashing myself to stand in denial of the evidently apparent arachnid beings, my common sense kicked in and pointed out that they were a threat and that I couldn't continue to function like this, in a non-stop self-imposed cycle of reprogramming and deprogramming, that if I were to survive I would need to ignore the barrel and accept my circumstances, accept who I had become through the process of life, whatever exactly my life had been. I remember killing most of the staff in cold blood on that day in 2014. It's more like watching a movie someone else made, really. I guess it was the hypnosis that did it. You might not put stock into hypnosis, might consider yourself immune to manipulation. Listen to a hypnotist right now, if you think that. Have them convince you that you can't stand up or that you're floating in space, that your tongue is melting into liquid or anything along those lines. See how immune you really are. I had done it to myself, I think. Or Mr. Macy had initiated the process, and I had continued it. I woke up, and instead of driving to the archive as usual, I went to the Walmart in Longmont, bought a semi-automatic rifle from behind the counter. I remember it was unusually warm that day, though not unbearably hot, the crickets in the fields busily humming to themselves, the little guppies in Birch Lake happily bubbling to themselves. I tested the rifle on the shores of Birch Lake. It was quiet. As I loaded it up, I thought about how normal this was, that this was unavoidable, that there were no alternatives. Every contingency had been denied me, every road led to this one moment, this sense of being alive in the present. In the here and now. I remember seeing Scott standing near the fax machine. He had been in a state of absolute complacency since Aspasia left to who knew where. Dear Scott, one of the first. Next to him the adipocere barrel sat, round and full and speaking to me through the blubber. Scott knew too much. Of course he had seen them, they were right there, right in front of his eyes. I remember that when I pulled the rifle out, he didn't appear shocked or startled, he just raised his hands and backed into the corner. For a few minutes, we just looked into each other's eyes, neither of us saying a word, both of us connecting over the shared experience which was about to take place. I remember, after every one of them had been eliminated, each one of their dangerous memories permanently destroyed, I went into my office and gathered up the hundreds of tapes I had filmed of myself sleeping. They were dangerous, too, they hinted at the existence of the things. I buried them, and the bodies of the staff, underneath the floor, using little more than everyday cement and my own unstoppable will. The barrel was behind the hole, and it murmured little. Then, when the mass grave was sealed up, when the final layer of concrete dried and everyone I had worked with for a decade or more had been permanently removed from history, the barrel gradually faded away. I was standing beneath the highway underpass. It was Denver, I think, though I can't be sure of where it was exactly. The area looked run down and it was coated everywhere with the sound of overhead traffic, and there was a man standing about 20 feet away from me with a stupid haircut and a checkered shirt. He's holding a camcorder over his shoulder and smiling. He looks down at the ground, picks something up, lets it blow away into the wind. I'm writing the same person. I'm in my villa at Orange Bay scribbling madly on a sheet of notepad paper. Something about lawsuits, responsibility, my hands are moving faster than I can keep up with them. I put the thing into an envelope, set it out on the front porch, hope it reaches the man with the camcorder as soon as possible. I never met him, but he will find it. Me to forget what happened, where I was, what it was, all of it. As soon as possible. Drink a pineapple daiquiri, relax. I was Macy's Patsy, the worm on the end of the hook. He is only immortal because he uses other people to sustain his immortality, and I used other people to sustain mine, but it all goes up to him. He lives forever and used me to keep them off his trail, as a diversion. I and all my endeavors were nothing more than a side trip off the main road. I have to hand it to you, Macy. You knew I was suggestible. You know when anyone is. You're very good at that. You slip through the hands of the clock like a thief, and they'll probably never find you. But they will find me. You counted on that. I'm going over to the bar to pour myself a cocktail. Hands are shaking so a little bit of the absinthe spills onto the wood grain. I wipe it up haphazardly using the corner of my shirt. Outside, the sun is fading and the waves are turning choppy. I can feel them, they're out there. It's a game of waiting now. Strata is growing, layering over itself in distinctly unnatural ways. Sky is starting to look like static. There she is. The dark lady. You remember me, don't you? She giggles as she brushes her hair from her eyes and approaches me, arms outstretched. I politely decline the hug and make my way back over to the chaise lounge. She pulls up a small plastic chair and folds her hands in her lap. Her nails are painted with a tasteless magenta. She's clasping a small purse with a Memphis Group design on it. Trying to remember where I saw her, but I'm drawing blanks. As if on cue, she lifts her finger to jog my memory. On tape, I scream, before she can interject. You sat in that room, talk to me, you're a murderer. Get the hell out. My eyes bolt open, and the next thing I know, I'm at her throat, because I remember that night at the archive, getting sucked into her world, becoming one with it. I remember the barrel and the tarp, and the look she had given me, that all-knowing, soul-piercing stare. She claws at my face, then grabs my wrist and forces me onto the floor. Without thinking, she grabs a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet and rams it against my left temple. For a while, all I can make out is her face. It looks older than it did a moment ago. She has crow's feet and her neck is less defined. It's hard to make out if this is illusory or not. She probably is one of them. What's wrong with you, Chloe? She retorts. She sets me up on the tan polyester couch next to the potted palm I bought in the market square in Kingston upon my arrival. Don't you remember? We talked about this on the phone a week ago. I spent a lot of money to come here. The last thing I expected was for you to get nasty. She heads over to the fridge and opens it, retrieving a stick of celery which she starts munching on with vigor. Put my fingers up to my temple, I'm bleeding profusely. Why isn't she dialing 911 if she really means no harm? A movie starts playing in my head, every bit as vivid as the tape which held her. It's 1993 and I'm 17 again. This is long before the AST conference, before I looped back. I lived a normal life, always felt unfulfilled, but I really did take what I had for granted. In hindsight, maybe that's where I went wrong. I'm on my way to the convenience store because the old crone has asked for another pack of cigarettes. She always switches the brand up on me. I think it's to deliberately confuse me. The sun overhead is beating down, and for a while I consider heading over to Catherine Albertson Park a few blocks away to hang out under the gazebo, ditch the mission to the convenience store, and check out the birds. I have my Walkman on me. I'm listening to something on my headphones. A synth-pop track, it goes in through my ears and fills my head, and I'm kind of standing in place on the sidewalk instead of walking forward, swaying back and forth. It's the sort of music the hag has discouraged me from listening to. She says I should focus on my grades. I'm so tired. Joyce is on her front porch. She's holding a glass of lemonade and watching me with interest. Those flickering eyes reflect off the surface of the cup she's holding. She's secluded there in a miniature jungle of shade beneath a wooden awning. It looks so cool under there, in the darkness. Hey, kid, she exclaims, raising her hand. Do you want to make a few extra bucks? Confused, I take the headphones off, and she repeats her offer. For a while I consider it. I've never really spoken to strangers before. In fact, I don't get out much. I've seen Joyce a few times, mostly shopping at the grocery store, in the produce section. But I don't know her, really. I don't know who she is or why she would ask me, randomly, to help her with something instead of calling a carpenter or an electrician from the yellow pages. I'm tired, though. So tired. And that shade. Cool, she says as I make my way up towards where she's sitting. Now before we go back, I'm going to lay down a few ground rules. You don't tell anyone about this. You do whatever I ask, and you don't back down. Agreed? I nod, thinking that whatever she has is probably pretty labor-intensive. She pulls out a crisp $100 bill and lays it flat in the middle of my palm. Without speaking, or displaying my awe, I put it in my pocket and follow her to the back gate, which she unlocks. It opens onto a placid noontime landscape. There's a fence and trees on the outskirts, and mostly there's a big lawn, and in the middle of the lawn is a large hole, 3 feet by 5 feet and maybe 10 feet deep. She steps in behind me, and looking around with nerves as if to ensure nobody spotted us entering, she shuts the gate. I walk slowly over to the vat. It makes a slight hissing sound as she pops the plastic lid off with those perfectly manicured nails of hers, sets the lid gingerly down onto the equally manicured lawn, and I near the orifice inch by inch. Adipocere is what greets me, the stench of death amid acidic tones, a kind of lumpy fat substance, what appears to be some sort of long dismembered facial remnant staring up at me from the depths, a mouth which has consumed its prey. And all around it the bubbles, rising and popping and seething, a dark pool of liquid destruction. She allows me to get a good look at what's inside, a really good look, a better look than anyone else will ever receive, and then she closes it. You know what to do, kiddo, she says. Hoist it on in. With some effort, I manage to ease my trembling knuckles underneath the weight of the barrel, grip its sides, and gradually lower it into the dirt. It's surprisingly light, only 90 pounds or so. She hands me the shovel and some plastic bags to wrap my hands with, and stands there with folded arms and a wry smile as I shovel the dirt in, ounce for ounce and pound for pound, erasing a person, an entity, a name from history and from memory. Just like recording over a tape, the audio that was is no longer present, it's dissipated into the ether. The visuals are new, the substance has been altered. In the 1960s and 1970s, wiping tapes in the television industry was a common practice. Entire episodes of The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson from that period, as well as countless other programs, are impossible to view, all because they wanted to save money without buying new tapes. Record over the old ones, they said, it doesn't matter, get it out as soon as possible, don't worry about it. Wipe over it, reuse it, cover the hole, done. And now there are gaps. Very noticeable gaps. Memory holes. It is 2022 and I am lying on the couch, and Joyce is there, standing over me, broken whiskey bottle held in those same perfectly manicured nails, as polished as ever, her eyes as bright as diamonds. I'm feeling the effects of blood loss, blood all over my shirt and all over the fabric, my temple has fused with the fabric, clotting up, but it's still running, spooling out of me like a cassette deck gone haywire, my contents are unfurling and spilling, and the darkness is growing behind my cornea. Poor Chloe, is one of the last things I hear. Too vindictive. I remember back in Boise, you know. I heard what they said about you behind your back. Always wanting things you couldn't achieve, always outliving your capacity, never satisfied. I heard that from your friends and the people you thought were your friends. Sitting out regularly, you catch a lot of private conversations. Idle gossip, murmurs of discontent. Nobody ever liked you, Chloe. I contemplate my current being, in the present, in the here and now, and analyze with the last remnant of what was my mind the texture of the couch, the microscopic patterns formed by the thread, the temperature of the air is tested without much effect by my fingertips, which twitch a millimeter and then lie cold. And Joyce is there, and in many ways she's the same as she always had been, fading into static, the collective maelstrom of our deceptive primate recollection, the repository of terrible ideas and long-abandoned hope. She recedes an inch every hour, holding the whiskey bottle and speaking in that strange voice which only she is capable of, the one which simultaneously unsettles and excites. I am headed for a different area of the psyche. I am en route to a large dark room with a circular opening.
The Collector. Originally posted to MySpace. com/Stance Ghost Adventures August 29, 2005. Hey there everyone. Had an experience this week I think might be worth posting here. Comment down below if you've ever seen anything along these lines. You probably already know this about me if you've been reading this blog, but I always want to be where the action is. I think it's some kind of hyperfixation, akin to those old reporters who always wanted to be the first on the scene whenever there was a burning building or a crime scene. Of course, in my case I arrive long after the buildings have burned down and the chalk that marked the body has been washed away by rain. But you get the point. I think what it boils down to is curiosity, the insatiable hunger to confront the unknown which has driven us forward since the dawn of time. My rational thinking tells me I shouldn't visit the empty sewage pipe, that even if there are no ghosts there's probably some jagged metal I could cut myself on or a spider nest or something equally awful. But then my curiosity kicks in and it's onward to the sewage pipe we go. Rinse and repeat. I usually go on a couple expeditions a year. Takes a lot of resources, film and audio equipment, spectrograms, which for whatever reason seem to be everyone's favorite, and of course enough for motels and food. A lot of that comes from donations I've got from you, reading this blog right now, so thanks for that. I try to give you guys satisfactory results. Not concrete evidence, but something. I always have to get something. Anyway, this year I already went to visit the DeVry compound in Melrose. You can find my account of that trip on the next page, but for now I'd like to tell you about my expedition to the abandoned Harcourt Theater in Woodhaven, Michigan. The theater, built in 1936, has like many other buildings nationwide fallen prey to entropy. 6 years ago, it was burned. Nobody knows exactly how the fire started. However, local folklore states that the owner started the fire himself. The building has for obvious reasons failed to acquire landmark status, and as such by the time I got there it was scheduled for demolition the following month. There was no fence around it, though, and nobody around, and I decided it was likely my only chance to explore this structure before it was entirely gone from the face of the earth. The building itself is only half of what it used to be, made for the most part out of bricks and mortar, now turned ash black. It's set back in a row of similarly useless buildings, all with foreclosure signs across the front. I arrived around 7 p.m. right when the sun was going down. The carpet was wet, a lot of water damage because the roof is actually caving in some places. In the front it's completely open, giving way to a panoramic view of the sky. It was honestly surreal to step into a building this ruined. Everywhere you saw things that would otherwise be normal. The popcorn machine had given into the heat, glass spewed all over, the remnants of 6-year-old popcorn scattered around. All the posters were beyond recognition, peeling and flaking. And the main desk was completely gone. I guess it had been wood, but now there was just a rectangular formation of ash. Like I said, absolutely surreal. By this point visibility is dropping, so I get my flashlight out and point it directly at the back, where the auditoriums are. I also get my camera out, turn on the flash, and start taking pictures at 10-second intervals while I walk forward. It's important in a place like this to keep taking as many pictures as possible as often as possible. The more pictures, the higher the likelihood you'll catch something. The first auditorium I step into is strangely quiet, the kind of death knell you can only encounter in an area this devoid of activity, and the seats seem to stretch onward in rows and columns ad infinitum. The screen is tattered and beaten, worn from the storms which have pelted it. I sit down in one of these battered recliners, catch my breath. Camera is still good on battery. I point the flashlight directly ahead, its beam glints off the particulate. This is where it gets odd, folks. Place did have some kind of presence. Breath on my neck, I whirl around, stand up, legs feel faint. Nobody there. Footsteps which seem to sound down the aisle, back toward the entrance. I wasn't alone. Something exhaled on me. It's not often my arms start feeling like a block of ice, but I warmed them up and proceeded out of the auditorium. Whatever it was had left. By now it was night, so I turned my flashlight up to its maximum setting. I tried some of the other auditoriums, a lot of them were completely gone, not save sticks and rubble. I was about to leave when one of them caught my eye. Room C, if memory serves, though the room labels were coated in soot and nigh impossible to make out in the limited visibility. The door was broken off its hinge and tilted askew. It gave way to a massive cinematic cave at least 70 feet high, the seats in the back so far from the screen up front that I wondered how anyone sitting back there was supposed to watch the movie. It seemed impossible. This screen was in much better condition, save one corner which had been singed by the left wall. It was intact. A vacant slate, a blank gray monolith that careened upward in my field of vision. Fingers on my arm. Again, the sensation was unmistakable, so my heart skips a beat. I turn around, and there's nobody there. But there is something. Spots made of little flashing debris. Debris the size of rice. They flicker, alternate between a stark white and a deep jet black, and they also seem to glow in the dark. I reach down and touch the substance. It's a liquid composed of these little electric black and white things. They move and crackle like a hive of insects. They feel moist but also give your fingers a little shock, like those novelty chewing gum things. I'm not sure I would describe it as painful. Whatever this residue is, it looks like static. Like TV static. Like someone sliced open a television set and disemboweled it, spilling its innards all over the floor. I don't know how else to describe it. It leads up in a trail to the projection room, so against my better judgment I shamble up the stairs in the back, holding the wall and sticking close to it. 5 feet to the projection room. Never been in one of these before. I always wondered how they looked, how it would feel to watch a movie from up here as the projector is spinning and performing its illuminated magic for the assembled crowd of hundreds below. I open the door, which has been halfway consumed by those long-gone flames, and step inside. There, sitting on the projector, is a VHS tape. And around me, all around me, is this crackling substance, this wet chaos. It floats in the air, some of it, another bit sticks to my shoes. I approach the projector, which has been eaten away by rust during this long 6-year interval. This is the VHS tape. I decide to take it. If I don't, nobody else will. So now I'm running out of this room full of this substance. At the time I was scared it might have been radioactive, cassette tucked under my arm, and I step over all the rubble and assorted debris and run for the exit like hell. As I do, my flashlight dies and I'm surrounded by the claustrophobic energy of the place, how it swallows you deep inside. And if someone got lost in here, like, really and truly lost, they would probably wander around before collapsing and starving. Luckily, with a shake of the light, I'm able to resuscitate the batteries. I scramble out the front, picking my way across the heap of discarded refuse, and then I'm back on the street. I turned the tape over a few times in my hands. Bent down to see if any of the stuff was on me. There was a little bit, but it was fading. Becoming less vibrant, it flicked on and off a few times, and then as I tried scooping it up I realized it was nothing more than dust. It blew away in the wind. Just dust. That's what it was. I know, right? I'm an idiot. I guess that while I was shining the flashlight on it there was some kind of optical illusion. Something to do with the way the light reflected off it or something. I don't know, really, I'm not that good at optics. I drove to a Denny's a few miles down the highway because it was the only place open this late and got a coffee to keep me awake for the drive back. My nerves needed some refreshment, I was exhausted. I had the tape out in front of me, and while I was turning it over in my hands I noticed that this guy in the booth opposite me was looking at the tape while he stuffed his face with pancakes. He was tall, and thin, and I guess he had an alfalfa haircut, that is to say, there was this one sprig of hair that stood up on the front. And he was wearing this professional business suit. He looked kind of goofy, if I'm being honest. He got up and walked over to me. "How much for the tape?" he asks. I was confused by this, but I figure maybe he's some kind of collector. But then, he doesn't know where this tape came from, or what's on it. Hell, I don't even know what's on it. And I should have got up and walked out without giving him the time of day. Because I wanted to know what was on it. I still do. That same insatiable curiosity, that same hunger, the imp of the perverse, as Poe put it. I was tired though, my senses were impaired from the experience at the Harcourt. $100, I murmur absent-mindedly, really to see if he'll bite more than anything else. I doubted he would go for it, but he smiles and reaches for his pocket. I gape, wide-eyed, as he lays out a crisp $100 next to my cup. "Thank you," he said. And after that I drove straight home. Typing this up now, it all seems imaginary. Too coincidental to be true. I suppose that's the problem with my line of work. We must remain simultaneously skeptical and open-minded, disregard confirmation bias while at the same time giving into it. We must accept the improbable while discarding the patently impossible, and we must firmly ride the line between hearsay and fact. I still want to know what was on there. Probably just a bootleg of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure or something.
Don't look up at the fan. Originally posted to the Transient Memories discussion board August 23, 2007. It doesn't seem like something I should remember, or something anyone would ever remember, but I remember it all the same. It sticks with me, follows me around, and every so often it gets to the forefront of my priorities, and I plan on setting aside an entire day and going through all the search engines, using keywords to find it. I never do, though. Part of what bothers me about it is how fragile my weak human memory is, the fact that I'll probably never be able to get the full picture, the full context, before I die. How many other lost memories are stored away up here? It's impossible to tell for sure, and that's what's really the worst. Memory is pliable and palpable, you can manipulate and distort it, you can have a dream and confuse it with something that actually happened, or have a dream influenced by actual memories. I am relatively sure, though, that this wasn't a dream, and that's what makes it stick. The confidence of knowing that I actually saw it. This was around the time video rental was big. I got it from a video shop that's since closed down. I know for a fact it wasn't on DVD, this was before DVD got very popular. That transitional period when it was technically available but very expensive. At the same time, I think this was shot using a digital camera or at the very least some high-budget equipment. It was not an amateur creation, It was crafted with intention and direction, and the people involved, whoever they are laughing to their graves. It opens on what looks to be the Vegas skyline. Whether it was Vegas or a similar desert city I can't say, only that it was vaguely of the American Southwest and had the captivating allure of a bright collection of jewels late at night. You know how it looks. A vast plain of nothing, and then there smack dab in the middle you see a collection of civilization, a herd of buildings ablaze as it were, and you take comfort in this. Somehow the skyline was not comforting. In the distance were the ambient noises, trucks getting refueled, casino chatter. The camera pans down from the sky to the buildings, slowly, and as it does we get closer to the lights, until the physical presence of the city becomes overwhelming. It is front and center and rushes at you in a grueling wide shot. Finally the camera settles on a roadside motel, not necessarily located near the city limits but close enough so as to feel remote, distant. And you watch this motel through time and distance, and its neon lights are in full fury. Outside there are a few cars. One pulls out, leaving a vacant spot. The camera pulls in yet again until we see the entirety of the motel's exterior. The sign is flashy yet tactful, maintaining a healthy balance between the overt and the blunt. While it was built decades ago, it has seen the changing tides and recessions, knows that it is one of a dying breed yet refuses to call it quits. It is a humble, unassuming establishment and makes no claims to the contrary. We cut to the interior of one of the rooms. It is decorated in the typical garb of the period, state-of-the-art television display with satellite hookup, stocked fridge and thoroughly washed linens. The room is structurally low, its ceiling is oppressive and present. You could reach up and feel the ceiling. There is only one floor to the motel. In the center of the room, sitting on the edge of the bed with her knees crossed, is a young woman in her early 20s, although by her demeanor you know she's been through a lifetime of issues and regret. Regret for what, you can't say, but she is tired of life on the move. She's been to dozens of cities although not hundreds, her hair contains stress and fray, and her dress is modest. She is holding either a small beverage or a cigarette. Probably not a cigarette, but the room is filled with smoke and an aura of times gone by. This is not her destination but it may as well be. Despite her demeanor, she seems relatively calm, collected, relaxed and accustomed to her environs. She also seems to carry with her an integral scrap of intent, that is to say, she has things to do, places to go and people to see. It is now that the nocturnal ambience of the exterior fades out, and our focus is drawn to the lighting of the room itself. There is perhaps one light bulb with one of those old-fashioned beaded pull cords directly above her bed. It frames her in such a way that she appears isolated from the further corners of the room, the entrance to the bathroom and the window behind her. Like a spotlight, the naked bulb makes her stand out in sharp contrast to the inhuman and industrial things shown until the present moment. She is a human presence. Beside her is her suitcase, opened, with a modest amount of luggage. She came from somewhere to here. She is a living, breathing organism in an otherwise dead and faceless world, a tangible entity. As with the cityscape, however, there is no comfort or solace in the scene. Because above her is a rotating ceiling fan, operated, I assume, by a similar pull cord, and it cuts the light from the bulb into thin ribbons which drift hypnotically over her face. Shreds the clarity into confusion, tosses the scene into a perceived conflict. The fan is only a fan, nothing more, nothing less. Made from cheap plastic, born in a sterile processing plant, it will one day end up in a landfill. Today, however, it is an antagonist. It is not haunted, has no spirits or demons inside, nor is the motel itself haunted by necessity. The framing of the fan, the creative decisions taken to present the fan as a whirring vortex of destruction are all that turns it from a mere appliance into a presence seen and felt, something raw and alive with animal energy. It pulses. This is another factor that grows as the distant lights of the city outside diminish the noise of the fan, powered by fuses and generators, transitioning in and out from a growl to a purr. A hum, one could call it. Ambient only without the magnitude levied its way. With the steps taken, it becomes more than a fan, It becomes a demon from the pits of hell, a mystery never solved, a question without an answer. Its physical form gives way to something much less surface level, more innate, obscured behind the fan's unassuming demeanor. She finishes the cigarette, or perhaps takes the last swig of her drink, and her attention, like ours, is raised to the fan. Her eyes are magnetized and then lock onto it like those of a hawk. Her limbs become rigid. She props herself up to get a better look at it. It continues to spin, all while the room becomes darker and the slashing of the light turns into a pseudo-spiral. She remains steadfast and looks up as the blades turn, one after the other, rounding the corner in a derby of kinetic prowess. Chup chup chup. The camera now focuses exclusively on two things: her face and the blades of the fan. As the film turns the fan into a monster, it too makes versatile use of the conditions of the scene to create variety. No two shots of her face are precisely the same, each in sequence reveals a new facet of who she is and what the fan is. We know that the fan is not a fan, it is a Magritte-esque dilemma between what our eyes take in and what our instincts are telling us is so. At the same time, it never outsteps its boundaries, never does anything a fan could not do given the technical limitations of such a device. And therein lies the dilemma. We will never know what the fan is. It's probably only a fan, but can you in all honesty be sure of that if you repeat that to yourself over and over again, will that assertion come to fruition? She looks up at the fan, and it stares back at her, and its pulse grows louder, and her gaze is ever more intent, and they are locked in a carnal death battle in which only one can win. The fan continues its infinite circuit, and she, with her laterally sectioned visage, keeps her eyes in one spot and does not move them. Does not presume to move them. Her eyes remain locked. The fan continues to spin. The tape ends.